My sister-in-law wore white to my wedding and tried to look like the bride. So, I gave her the attention she deserved. I got engaged to Oliver after 4 years of dating, and we started planning this beautiful garden wedding. Nothing too fancy, about 150 guests, but we saved for 2 years to make it special. My dress cost $3,000, which was a lot for us, but it was exactly what I dreamed about since I was little. Ivory silk with delicate beading, a cathedral train, and these beautiful cap sleeves. Oliver's sister, Diana, had always been weird about our relationship. She was 2 years older than him and used to introduce herself as the most important woman in his life. When we got engaged, she cried for 3 hours, not happy tears. She locked herself in Oliver's childhood room and sobbed about how everything was changing. Oliver thought she was just emotional, but I knew better. During wedding planning, Diana inserted herself into everything. Had opinions about the flowers, the venue, the food. Told me the centerpieces looked cheap. Said my color scheme was basic. Asked why we weren't having a chocolate fountain since Oliver loved chocolate. Every single decision became a battle. She actually called vendors behind my back trying to change orders. The florist called me confused because Diana said she was the bride's sister and wanted to switch to red roses. 3 weeks before the wedding, Diana asked what color her dress should be. I said anything but white or ivory. You know, standard wedding stuff. She rolled her eyes and said obviously she wasn't going to wear white. She wasn't tacky. I should have known something was up when she refused to show me her dress. Said she wanted it to be a surprise. Oliver told me to relax. Diana just wanted to look nice for the photos. The morning of my wedding, I was getting ready with my bridesmaids in the suite. Hair done, makeup perfect, about to put on my dress. Diana walked in wearing a full wedding gown. I mean, an actual wedding dress, strapless, sweetheart neckline, tulle skirt, built-in corset, beaded bodice, the works, even had a small train, pure white, not ivory, not cream, white. My maid of honor dropped her champagne glass. Diana spun around and said it was just a white sundress she found on sale. A sundress with a train and cathedral-length veil she was holding. I told her she needed to change immediately. She started crying and said I was always trying to exclude her from Oliver's life, that this was the only nice dress she owned and I was being a bridezilla. Oliver came in because he heard yelling, took one look at Diana and his face went red. Told her she looked beautiful and if I was a real sister, I'd want her to feel special, too. My photographer was capturing all of this, by the way. Diana sat down in my getting ready suite and started having her friend do her makeup like she was the bride. Posted selfies saying she was getting ready for the most important day of her brother's life. My mom tried to offer Diana one of her backup dresses, but Diana said they were too matronly. My sister offered her dress, but Diana said the color would wash her out. She had an excuse for everything. Finally, it was time for the ceremony. Diana tried to walk down the aisle right before me. The wedding coordinator had to physically block her and explain that only the bride walks last. Diana said she was Oliver's sister so she should get a special entrance. She ended up walking right before my bridesmaids, taking her sweet time, waving at guests like she was Princess Diana herself. Several guests actually thought there were 2 brides. My grandmother asked if Oliver was marrying both of us. During the ceremony, Diana stood behind Oliver instead of sitting down. Had to be asked 3 times to take her seat. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Diana actually started to stand up, but Oliver's dad pulled her down. She sobbed loudly through our vows, not touched crying, but dramatic wailing. The photographer had to edit her out of most ceremony shots. At the reception, Diana sat herself at our sweetheart table. Said she couldn't bear to be far from Oliver on his special day. We had to get venue staff to escort her to her assigned table. She kept trying to give a speech even though she wasn't in the wedding party. Grabbed the mic during dinner and started talking about how Oliver was her baby brother and no one would ever love him like his sister. My dad had to take the mic away. Then came the mother-son dance. Diana tried to cut in halfway through. Oliver's mom literally had to hold her back. During my father-daughter dance, she stood right at the edge of the dance floor taking selfies with us in the background. The final straw was when she caught my bouquet by literally tackling my 13-year-old cousin for it, declared that she'd be next to get married and stared directly at Oliver. That's when I decided Diana needed to learn about consequences. I grabbed Oliver's arm right there on the dance floor and pulled him toward the side door. He tried to smile at the guests watching us, but I could see his jaw was already set tight. We walked through the kitchen where the catering staff stopped to stare, then into a small storage room that smelled like old linens and floor polish. The second the door closed behind us, I turned to face him. His arms crossed over his chest before I even opened my mouth. And that defensive posture told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. I told him we needed to talk about what just happened with Diana and his cousin. He asked what I meant. Like, he genuinely didn't understand why I was upset. I said his sister just tackled a 13-year-old child to steal my bouquet. He said Diana was just excited and didn't mean any harm, that I was overreacting to everything she did. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I told him Diana wore a wedding dress to our wedding. She tried to walk down the aisle before me. She sat at our table. She gave a speech when she wasn't supposed to. She tried to cut in on his dance with his mother. And now she assaulted a child. He said those were all just misunderstandings and Diana loved him so much that she got emotional. I cut him off and said this wasn't about love. It was about boundaries and his sister crossed every single one today. He got this look on his face like I'd slapped him. Then he asked why I was trying to ruin his relationship with his sister on our wedding day. Said I'd been against Diana from the start and nothing she did would ever be good enough for me. I stared at him and realized he actually believed what he was saying. He genuinely couldn't see how insane his sister's behavior had been. This wasn't just about today. This was about 4 years of him choosing Diana's feelings over mine. And it was going to keep happening unless something changed. I told him I needed some air and left him standing there. When I walked back into the reception, Heidi was already coming toward me. She asked if I was okay, and I shook my head. My parents saw us talking and came over and I told them what Oliver had just said to me. My dad's face went bright red and a vein in his forehead started pulsing. My mom put her hand on his arm, but he shook it off and walked straight across the dance floor toward Oliver's parents. I watched my dad lean down to talk to Autumn and Jefferson at their table. His voice was quiet, but I could see how tense his shoulders were. Autumn's face crumpled and she started crying, saying something I couldn't hear from where I stood. Jefferson looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and staring down at his plate. My dad kept talking, gesturing back toward where Diana was still holding my bouquet like a trophy. Autumn shook her head and said something that made my dad's jaw clench. She was defending Diana. I could tell by the way she kept pointing at her daughter. Jefferson finally said something, but Autumn talked over him. He didn't try again. He just sat there looking like he wanted to disappear while his wife cried about how cruel I was being to Diana on what should be a family celebration. I made a decision right then. I walked over to the venue coordinator and told her I needed security to escort Diana out of my wedding. She looked shocked but nodded and went to get the staff. I walked back toward Diana, who was showing my bouquet to some of Oliver's relatives and talking about how she'd be getting married next. When the venue staff approached her and asked her to leave, Diana's face went from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. She screamed that I was a jealous who couldn't stand that Oliver loved his sister more than me. Said I'd been trying to push her out of his life since day one. 2 security guards had to take her arms and walk her toward the exit while she cried and yelled. Guests stopped dancing to watch. Some of Oliver's relatives looked horrified, but I couldn't tell if they were horrified at Diana or at me. Diana kept screaming that this was her brother's wedding and she had every right to be there. The security guards got her out the front doors and I heard her wailing even after they closed. Oliver came back into the reception about 5 minutes later. He looked around for Diana. Then his eyes found me standing with Heidi. He walked straight over and asked where his sister was. I told him I had her removed from the reception. He lost it, started yelling about how I humiliated Diana in front of everyone, how I ruined what should have been a perfect family day. Several guests turned to stare at us. Heidi stepped between us and told Oliver to lower his voice. He ignored her and kept going, saying Diana was just trying to celebrate with him and I couldn't handle not being the center of attention for 5 minutes. I felt like I was watching a stranger. This man yelling at me in front of our wedding guest was supposed to be my husband. I told him that if he couldn't see the problem with his sister wearing a wedding dress to our wedding and assaulting a child, then we had a serious marriage problem starting on day 1. He stared at me for a second, then said, "Maybe we did." He turned and walked out of our own wedding reception. I stood there in my $3,000 dress, watching him leave to go comfort Diana, and I felt like the biggest fool in the world. I'd married a man who would always choose his sister over me. My family and friends came over immediately. My mom hugged me while I tried not to cry and ruin my makeup even more than it already was. My sister said Oliver was acting like a child. My dad said we could get the marriage annulled if I wanted, but we all stayed for the rest of the reception because I'd paid for it and I wasn't going to let Diana ruin that, too. We danced and ate cake and pretended everything was fine. But the joy was completely gone from the day. Every time I smiled for a photo, I felt like I was lying. Willow came over during the last dance and quietly told me she'd captured everything on camera. Diana's dress, her attempted aisle walk, the bouquet tackle, all of it. She said I might need evidence later, and I realized she was probably right. The reception ended at 11 o'clock. My parents offered to let me stay with them, but I said I'd be fine. I drove to our apartment and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, but Oliver's car never showed up. I called him twice, and he didn't answer. Finally, I called Heidi and asked if I could come over. She said yes, immediately. I spent my wedding night on her couch in my reception dress crying and eating leftover pizza while she sat next to me and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Oliver texted me at 2 o'clock in the morning saying he was staying at his parents' house with Diana and we'd talk tomorrow. I stared at that text for a long time, wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life, marrying into this family. I woke up at Heidi's place around 9 the next morning with my neck stiff from the couch and my eyes swollen from crying. My phone had 17 missed calls. 12 from Oliver's mom, Autumn. 3 from Oliver. 2 from my own mom, checking if I was okay. I ignored all of them and took a shower in Heidi's guest bathroom, washing off yesterday's makeup that had smeared all over my face during the night. When I came out, Heidi had coffee ready and didn't ask me any questions, which was exactly what I needed. My phone rang again at 10:30. Autumn's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She didn't even say hello. Just launched right into how I owed Diana an apology for embarrassing her at the wedding. I sat there listening to her tell me that family forgives family and that I was starting my marriage by being divisive and cruel to Oliver's only sister. She said Diana had been crying all night and that I'd humiliated her in front of everyone by having security remove her like she was some kind of criminal. I asked Autumn if she saw what Diana was wearing. She said it was just a dress and I was being petty and jealous. I told her it was a wedding gown with a train and asked if she thought that was normal behavior. Autumn said Diana just wanted to look nice for her brother's special day and that I should be flattered Diana cared so much. That's when I hung up on her. I wasn't going to sit there and be gaslit about what happened at my own wedding. I called Oliver right after. He answered on the first ring and asked where I was. I told him that didn't matter and that he had 24 hours to come home and have a real conversation about boundaries or I was getting our marriage annulled before we even filed the certificate. The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he asked if I was serious. I said I'd never been more serious about anything in my life and that I was done playing games with his family's dysfunction. He tried to argue that we just got married yesterday and I was overreacting, but I cut him off. I told him I spent my wedding night crying on a couch because he chose to comfort his sister instead of supporting his wife. And if that's how our marriage was going to work, then I didn't want to be married. He said he'd come home that evening and we'd talk. I said, good, and hung up. Oliver showed up at our apartment around 7 o'clock that night. I'd gone home from Heidi's around noon and spent the afternoon sitting on our couch staring at the wall trying to figure out what I was going to say. When he walked in, he looked tired and guilty, which was something at least. We sat down in the living room and I told him we needed to have the most honest conversation we'd ever had about his family. He nodded and didn't argue. I asked him how long Diana had been like this. He looked down at his hands and admitted she'd always been this way. Said his parents taught him from the time he was little to just give in to keep the peace because Diana would throw fits that lasted for days if she didn't get her way. He said he knew it was unhealthy, but he'd spent his whole life managing her emotions and he didn't know how to stop. I asked him if he understood that I couldn't live like that. He said he was starting to see how bad it really was. I told him, starting to see it wasn't enough and that I needed him to actually do something about it. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos Willow had sent me the night before. She'd sent over 100 pictures from the wedding. I made Oliver look at every single one that had Diana in it. The getting ready suite where she was in full bridal wear. The ceremony where she tried to walk down the aisle before me. Her standing behind Oliver during our vows instead of sitting down. The sweetheart table where she tried to sit with us. The bouquet toss where she had my cousin Greta on the ground. Oliver's face changed as he looked through them. When he got to the image of Diana in her wedding dress trying to position herself to walk down the aisle, something shifted in his expression. He looked genuinely shocked, like he was seeing it for the first time, even though he'd been there. He kept staring at that photo and his hands started shaking. He said he didn't realize how bad it looked from the outside. I told him that was the problem, that he'd spent so long normalizing Diana's behavior that he couldn't see how crazy it actually was. We talked for 3 hours that night. I told Oliver that we needed to see a couples counselor before we even thought about going on our postponed honeymoon because this issue was basic to whether our marriage could work. He agreed immediately, which surprised me. Then he picked up his phone and called his parents. I heard Autumn answer and start talking, but Oliver interrupted her. He told them that we needed space from Diana while we worked things out. Autumn started crying on the other end of the line, saying he was choosing me over his sister and breaking up the family. Oliver said no. He was choosing his wife and setting healthy boundaries and Diana needed to respect that. I heard Jefferson's voice in the background saying something quiet. Oliver's face relaxed a little and he said, "Thanks, Dad." When he hung up, he told me his father had taken the phone and said he supported our decision, that Diana had gone too far this time. 3 days later, Diana started posting on social media. Old photos of her and Oliver as kids, pictures from family vacations, screenshots of text conversations. Every caption was about how family should come first and how some people try to separate loved ones. She posted a photo of Oliver at his high school graduation with a caption about how she'd always been there for him and always would be. Another one from his college move-in day saying, "Real family doesn't abandon each other." Several of Oliver's relatives who hadn't been at the wedding started commenting with hearts and supportive messages. His aunt commented that family bonds are forever. His cousin said blood is thicker than water. They had no idea what actually happened because Diana was playing the victim and making it look like I was forcing Oliver to cut her off for no reason. I texted Willow and asked if she could send me a private link to the wedding photos. She created a password-protected album and sent it over within an hour. I wrote a brief message explaining what happened at the wedding and shared the link with my parents, Oliver's parents, and a few close family members who'd been asking questions. I didn't add any drama or accusations, just said these were photos from the wedding and people could see for themselves what Diana had done. The response came fast. My mom called crying and saying she didn't realize how bad Diana's dress actually was because she'd been busy with other things during the ceremony. Oliver's aunt messaged me privately to apologize for her social media comment, saying she had no idea Diana wore a wedding gown. His cousin sent a long text saying she was sorry for supporting Diana without knowing the full story. Even some of Oliver's relatives I barely knew reached out to say Diana's behavior was unacceptable and they supported us setting boundaries. Our first counseling appointment was the following Tuesday. The therapist was a woman in her 50s who specialized in family systems. She asked Oliver to describe what happened at the wedding. At first, he tried to soften it, saying Diana got emotional and made some poor choices. The therapist asked him to be more specific and objective. Oliver took a deep breath and started listing things. He said Diana wore a white wedding dress with a train to our wedding. That she tried to walk down the aisle directly before the bride. That she refused to sit down during the ceremony and had to be asked multiple times. That she grabbed the microphone to give a speech she wasn't supposed to give. That she tried to cut in during the mother-son dance. That she physically tackled a 13-year-old to catch the bouquet. Hearing him say it all out loud in that calm office made something break in him. He started crying and couldn't stop. He said he'd been minimizing her actions for years, decades even, because that's what his family did. The therapist asked how that made him feel now. Oliver looked at me and apologized for not protecting our wedding day, for choosing Diana over me, for making me spend my wedding night crying instead of celebrating. 4 days after that session, someone knocked on our apartment door at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. Oliver was in the shower and I was making coffee in my pajamas. I opened the door and Diana was standing there in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, her hair in a messy bun. She pushed past me into the apartment before I could say anything. She stood in our living room and said we needed to talk. I told her Oliver and I had asked for space and she needed to leave. She ignored me and started talking about how I was forcing Oliver to cut her off, how I was destroying their family, how she'd been there for him his whole life and I had no right to come between them. Oliver came out of the bathroom in a towel, heard Diana's voice and went back to get dressed. When he came out in jeans and a t-shirt, Diana turned to him and said he had to choose. Either he could have a relationship with his sister or he could have a relationship with me, but he couldn't have both. Oliver stood next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. He told Diana calmly but firmly that he chose his wife. That Diana needed professional help to deal with her unhealthy feelings about him. That wearing a wedding dress to his wedding wasn't normal sisterly love. It was something that needed therapy. Diana's face went red and she started yelling that I'd brainwashed him. That he never would have said these things before he met me. Diana left our apartment and went straight to her phone. By that afternoon, Oliver's entire extended family was blowing up with messages and calls. Diana had called everyone and told them I was forcing Oliver to abandon his sister, that I'd threatened to leave him if he didn't cut Diana out of his life completely. She said I was manipulative and controlling and trying to separate Oliver from everyone who loved him. Oliver's phone rang constantly. His grandmother called saying she was disappointed in him. His uncle left a voicemail about respecting family. 3 different cousins texted asking what was going on and why he was being so cruel to Diana. Oliver's parents were caught in the middle of it all. Autumn sent a long text defending Diana and saying we were being too harsh, that Diana just needed time and understanding. But Jefferson called Oliver directly and said quietly that he thought Diana needed therapy, that her behavior at the wedding had been inappropriate, and that he supported us taking space even if Autumn didn't agree. Oliver and I spent 2 days working on the message. We sat at our kitchen table with my laptop between us, going through Willow's photos one by one. I picked out 12 images that told the whole story. Diana in the full wedding dress in my getting ready suite. Diana trying to walk down the aisle before me with Chase physically blocking her path. Diana standing behind Oliver during our vows instead of sitting down. Diana at our sweetheart table refusing to move. Diana grabbing the microphone from my dad. Diana tackling Greta for the bouquet. Oliver wrote the explanation part because I was too angry to be fair. He typed out what happened at the wedding in simple terms without calling Diana names or being cruel. He explained that we weren't cutting her off forever, but we needed space and boundaries. He said Diana needed to admit what she did was wrong before we could move forward. I added a paragraph about how we understood this was hard for everyone, but we hoped they could see why we were hurt. We sent it to Oliver's entire extended family at once, so Diana couldn't control the story anymore. The responses started coming in within minutes. Oliver's aunt texted immediately saying she had no idea Diana wore an actual wedding dress, and she was horrified. 2 of his cousins apologized for believing Diana's version of events. His grandmother called and said she was sorry for judging us without knowing the full truth. But then the other messages started. Oliver's uncle sent 3 paragraphs about how family should forgive and forget. Autumn called crying and said, "We were publicly shaming Diana and making her a target." One of Oliver's cousins said we were being dramatic over a dress and people wear white to weddings all the time. Another relative said, "Diana clearly had mental health issues and we should have compassion instead of posting photos to embarrass her." Oliver sat there reading every message out loud to me. Some made him smile, some made his jaw clench. When his mom's message came through saying we were cruel and heartless, he put his phone face down on the table and didn't pick it up for an hour. We realized pretty quickly that his family was never going to be united on this. There would always be people who thought Diana could do no wrong and people who saw her behavior for what it was. Oliver and I talked about it over dinner that night and decided we were okay with that. We couldn't control how other people reacted. We could only control our own boundaries and how we responded to his family going forward. Oliver told his parents we wouldn't be coming to family dinners until Diana apologized and showed real change. Autumn stopped speaking to us entirely. Jefferson would call Oliver once a week just to check in, but never mention Diana. The family group chat that used to be active every day went completely silent. Oliver's birthday came and went with only cards from Jefferson and a few cousins. My birthday got ignored by his entire family except Jefferson again. We celebrated with my family instead, and honestly, it was better without the tension. 2 months after the wedding, I was making breakfast when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam, but I opened it and saw Diana's name at the bottom. The message was 3 sentences long. She said she was sorry for wearing white to our wedding. She said she knew it was wrong and she was working on herself in therapy. She said she hoped someday we could talk. I showed Oliver and watched his face carefully. He read it twice before saying anything. He told me it wasn't the full apology we deserved, but it was more than Diana had ever admitted in her entire life. She had never once said she was wrong about anything. This was huge for her, even if it felt small to us. I asked if he wanted to respond, and he said, "Not yet." He wanted to see if she actually stayed in therapy and made real changes before we opened that door again. We saved the message, but didn't reply. 3 weeks later, Jefferson called and said Diana was going to therapy twice a week and actually talking about her attachment issues. He didn't ask us to forgive her or come back to family events. He just wanted us to know she was trying. Oliver thanked him and said we appreciated the update. That was enough for now. 3 months after our wedding, Oliver and I finally booked our honeymoon. We picked a beach resort in Mexico that we'd been looking at since we got engaged. The trip we should have taken right after the wedding, but couldn't because of everything with Diana. I packed my suitcase with swimsuits and sundresses while Oliver handled the travel documents. We flew out on a Tuesday morning and spent a week doing absolutely nothing but laying on the beach and eating good food. No family drama, no text messages about Diana, no stress about who was mad at us this week, just the 2 of us being married and happy. On our 3rd day there, we were sitting on the beach watching the sunset when Oliver took my hand. He said our wedding day didn't go how we planned, but our marriage was stronger because of it. We learned how to set boundaries early instead of years down the road. We learned how to be a team when his family pushed back. He said he had my back now in ways he didn't before the wedding, and that made him a better husband. I squeezed his hand and told him I agreed. We went through something really hard right at the start, and we came out okay. We knew how to handle his family now. We knew what our limits were. We had rules about what we would and wouldn't accept. That gave me real hope that we could handle whatever came next together. The marriage was going to work because we both chose it over his family's dysfunction. Oliver kissed me as the sun went down and I felt actually married for the first time since our wedding day. This was what it was supposed to feel like, just us against whatever problems came up. Partners in the real sense. We stayed on that beach until it got dark and the resort staff started putting away the chairs. Then we went back to our room and ordered room service and watched bad movies in bed. It was perfect. It was exactly what our wedding night should have been 3 months earlier. Better late than never.